In June 2019, in our earlier days of working on our show Double Talk, we received an email from a publicist pitching her client, an up-and-coming actor, for an interview. Always looking to meet new people and enjoy a fun conversation, we got on the phone with Zach Horwitz, stage name Zach Avery. Fast forward 5 years to just a couple of weeks ago, and the two of us were browsing YouTube when we got a suggested video in our feed about an actor who landed himself in prison for 20 years after masterminding the biggest Ponzi scheme in Hollywood history. His name was Zach Horwitz. Through his scheme, he defrauded investors of $227 million, and he had already been at it for years by the time we met him over the phone. During that 2019 interview, while describing how he prepares for an acting role, Zach told us, psychology plays such a large part in this business because it's a real study on why people do the things that they do, and the outside influences that push them toward these decisions. Reading those words on the page now, we realize that this is the very premise that has us so hooked on the Zach Horwitz case now. Why did he do it, and how? What turns a regular guy with a dream into a criminal, and more specifically, a fraud? Well, in perfect timing came a brand new documentary premiering at Tribeca, Bad Actor, a Hollywood Ponzi scheme, an hour-and-a-half long deep dive that exposes the allure of the glitz and glamour that ensnared both Horwitz and his victims. Exactly what we were looking for.
We caught up with the film's writer and director at the premiere at the SVA Theater in New York City. We just learned about this case that Zach Avery, we were just telling you we'd interviewed years ago, was now involved in the biggest Hollywood Ponzi scheme in history, and it absolutely blew my mind, and I kind of went down the rabbit hole, and I just feel like there's so much more I want to know, which is why I'm really excited to see the film. So for those of us who still have so many questions and just want to fall deeper into this whole mess, what will surprise us that we'll learn from the film?
I think for me, you will be surprised to see that you are one of many people that were roped into interviewing this guy for movie roles that you were probably led to think were much bigger than they actually were. And
we didn't even question it.
So when you watch our film, you'll see that he did a lot of interviews for these films, and then he actually maybe had a tiny part in the movie that you were interviewing for. And there was an even bigger revelation that you'll find out in our movie about how he got in that film in the first place, which, do you want to spoil it?
He was paying for the roles in his films. So he bought his way into The White Crow and many other films. And I was going to say something that I really admire about Zach is that he's such a good self-promoter.
Right.
I'm sure when you were interviewing him, he made himself seem really important. Much better than us. He's good about talking about himself and making himself seem like a star. And I think we can take some lessons from him in that way. Not in any other way.
Yeah. He just seems because I've met a lot of people like him, he just seems very ambitious. He just seems I figured they weren't huge roles in big movies, but it just seems like he had this whole plan and he was going for it, and I just didn't think to question it. I told you guys earlier when I saw a video, this is how I learned about it a few days ago, I recognized his face, and I was like, I think we interviewed him for something.
We interviewed him under Zach Avery, the
and he's Zach Horwitz, right?
Yeah. Well, and I'm interested too, I thought that if anything, he had a big role, but these were small movies, but he didn't even have big roles in these movies. Oh man.
Small roles in small relatively small movies.
Was he legitimately getting any roles that he was not involved in?
I mean, I don't want to say that he never legitimately got a role. All we know is that he certainly was buying his way into roles. He was buying his way into interviews. And at the end of the day, he was committing huge financial crime, fraud, which of course led to him being convicted, and he's now in jail for 20 years. So I hate to say it, but the Double Talk show might be complicit in a huge crime by promoting this guy.
Uh-oh!
FBI might come knocking.
One of the questions the film asks is if his acting career facilitated this massive Ponzi scheme, or if it was the other way around. Do you have an answer at this point, or was it a bit of both?
I think it was a bit of both, and I think both feed the other. His interest in acting, his ability, once he had money, whether he came by it legitimate means or otherwise, he was able to perpetuate his own acting career by paying for roles, as we discussed. So I think his interest in films and his interest in scams just kind of came together in a perfect marriage for a while until it didn't.
So how did you all stumble upon the story to even do the film?
So the production company that made our film, Neon, the heads of Neon, being industry themselves, loved the story when it came out because it's such a great industry inside story. Like, here's an actor that tried to game the system, and so they reached out to me as a documentary director and said, we want to tell this story. And so when you watch our film, you'll see that I came up with a bit of a creative way of telling this story, and that when we were doing our research, we saw that a lot of people were getting scammed by this guy and felt really bad about having fallen for his trap, and asked the question, how could I be so stupid? How could I get caught by this lie? And so the whole point of our movie is to say it can happen to anybody. And so that's all I'll say at this point about our film, but like, our film's cool because there's a twist at the end.
So exciting.
Ooh. Do you think that I always wonder about like major scam artists, do you think that he convinced himself that do you think he believed his own lies to a certain degree? I almost wonder that with
That's a good
Elizabeth
question,
Holmes
yeah.
too. Like, do you based on, I mean, you probably know the story better than almost anybody. Do you think that he bought it himself? Because even I barely remember the interview, but like nothing stood out to he seemed very confident. He just seems like any other guy that you talk to that's like working on something from the ground up.
But there's a certain point where like he knew he was writing fake emails
Yeah.
from Netflix.
Do you think there's any chance that he was like, this is how the business works?
Yeah.
Look, I think with all of these guys, it starts, however it starts, whether it's innocent, whether they meant to do it in the first place, you do get to a point where you start to believe your own lies, and we see that with Zach. But you also get to a point where you realize that you're caught in your own trap, and you see in our film that when the cops finally invaded his house and arrested him, he didn't even try and deny it. He knew that the game was up. So it's a tragic story. He lost everything, his wife, he has young kids, and it's just a tragic story of someone trying to game the system and sort of backdoor their way into this like very seedy underworld of Hollywood. You know, that unfortunately we're exploring this theme of like how tough it is to get in as an actor, and the lengths that people will go, even commit crime to try and get their Hollywood dream to come true.
And I love the double meaning, the title Bad Actor, because I think that you could argue that his most convincing and best role is the one that he played off set, you know? He was acting with everybody around him, convincing them that he was this legitimate businessman.
He didn't even want to admit that he was a businessman.
Nobody told us.
Nobody told us that he was involved in any sort of company. It was like he definitely just sold himself or his publicist as just an actor.
So how do you think he had so many people fooled when he's such a bad actor?
I think he was just very confident. Yeah. And I think if you're confident, and each time you fool someone, it gives you a little bit of a rush, and you continue to be more confident.
Yeah.
And then
Charming too.
When you don't think you're going to get caught, it's amazing how confident and how successful you can be just because you feel good. And I think he felt good for a long time.
So last question, what do you think that we as viewers should take away from this film besides the obvious of don't commit massive fraud?
I think a big thing that David touched on is that we're really trying to show with this film how much empathy we should have for the victims, how easy it is to be taken for a ride in any capacity, not just in Hollywood, and just to have grace for those victims and realize that anyone can be scammed.
In a minor way, we were too. Yeah,
No,
true. No, they're coming for us.
Because we didn't question it.
Yeah.
Because you don't think to, especially like until someone gives you a major reason not to believe them, you don't question it. And I guess that's kind of a lesson to be learned.
Yeah.
That's really a good reason to watch this film because, as I said, we're investigating this crime, but the film is a really fun crime in itself. That's all I'll say.